Hello and welcome to the High Maintenance Hippie podcast. This is your host, Ashley from Ashley Taylor Wellness. On this podcast, we talk about all things beauty, health, wellness, and optimization. Being a high maintenance hippie represents not being boxed in, as I strongly believe that one size does not fit all. I'm a nurse turned coach, and I have learned so much about both conventional and alternative options, and I want to help you expand your options. I'm here to inspire you to learn new ways to improve your quality of life and to take your power back. I'm so excited that you're here, so let's get started. Hello and welcome back to the High Maintenance Hippie podcast. Today's guest is someone that is my favorite person on the internet, Dr. Joseph Yee. Yeah, my favorite person on the internet, and I mean that. You are hilarious. You're so good at looking at both sides. You keep an open mind and open heart, and I really love what you do. So he is a holistic psychiatrist, and he specializes in addiction medicine and medication detoxification, and he is expanding his knowledge and tools. And he spoke at the biohacking conference recently about psychedelics. So I'm really excited to dive into that topic and many more. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me, Ashley Taylor Wellness. It's an honor to be here and to vibe with you and the good people watching and listening to this podcast.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, I think I loved your account because I first started to watch your lives probably 2020. How you would
That's
talk
when
about
I was like really, really rowdy. I kind of toned down a little bit.
Yeah.
Now that I'm 47 years old, but yeah, I was going
We
pretty
all
ham.
did. Yeah, you were letting loose, but I loved it. It was so refreshing. I'm like, this guy just doesn't give a fuck, but you do just about what other people think. You're just so authentic and very funny. So definitely recommend checking out his Instagram, and the lives I live for them. So why did you become a doctor, specifically a psychiatrist?
Yeah, psychiatry kind of chose me. I wasn't like planning on becoming a psychiatrist. And you know the story, the people that support my account, they know the story for it. But for anyone new, I grew up being bullied a lot. I had parents who were broke dry cleaners. The girls that I liked didn't like me, and I didn't have many friends. So I figured that if I became a doctor, if I actually made some money, if I became someone, that I could possibly have a girlfriend, some social clout, and buy things and travel and own a nice home. So all for the wrong reasons to really want to become a doctor. You know, that helping people wasn't part of the equation, really. But, you know, as the great Tony Robbins always says, you know, pain is one of the greatest motivators in life. And it definitely pushed me to work a lot harder when everyone was partying. I strapped down with my books and I did a lot of things that I didn't want to do to get into medical school. And I actually got into medical school 2 years earlier than most other people. I got a free ride to Rutgers College. And then my junior year, I got accepted to medical school. And when I got in, I had the idea that I was going to become a pediatrician, not because I cared about kids, but because I thought it was the cool thing to do. Wow, a doctor who actually like looks after kids, whatever. But I realized that I didn't like working with sick kids. And when we had this course called Gross Anatomy, where we had to cut open dead bodies and examine the liver and the brain and all this stuff, that was the moment that I said, okay, this is not for me. And that's a pretty horrific experience, man. Horrific memory of that incident, because when you work your ass off all your life to achieve something like your dream, and then you come to realize that the dream is a nightmare, it sucks, Ashley. It really does. So I had this painful talk with my family and the dean, and I asked for a medical leave. I told them I didn't want to be here anymore. So they said, take 3 years off, and then, you know, you could come back if you want to. So they were kind enough to at least give me that leeway. But I wasn't planning on coming back. I had that security to come back to medical school, but I went and tried to become a musician because at the time I was doing a lot of like ecstasy and started getting into all these like polysubstances. And somehow that led me to thinking about becoming a professional musician and a DJ and an artist. So I went hardcore into the music field for about 3 years. I was producing dance music. I was in a rock band too, and doing all these multiple projects. Did a lot of drugs. And then after about 3 years of putting poison into my body and not eating enough, it just got to this point where my mind, body, and soul was like, you can't do this anymore. And at that point, then it made sense for me to go back to medical school to become a psychiatrist that focuses on addictions because of my experiences. I felt like I got a PhD in drugs and mental health from my music days. The only problem was at the time that I was really sick. I was depressed as hell. And I needed to detox from all the drugs that I was putting into my body. So I detoxed myself, and I kind of like trained on my own, really. I feel like in hindsight, my PhD really came from my music days. And then going back into med school, when you had purpose, a strong reason to become a psychiatrist, it fueled me to get past the gross anatomies and all these other things that I didn't want to do. But truthfully, I didn't really learn much in medical school, to be honest with you. But that's how I ended up becoming a psychiatrist in a nutshell.
Well, I appreciate the radical honesty about maybe it wasn't for the right reasons initially. And maybe there was a piece, I don't even want to say ego, but just like it will bring me the things that I want. And I'll be honest, I always did want to care for people as a nurse, but I really like the safety. I thought this is the best way to help people for sure. It's got to be the American healthcare system. So I'm definitely going to be a part of that. And then my health deteriorated in that. But did you ever have to do night shifts in any of your residencies or trainings or anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So during residency and medical school, you have to do what's called, you have to be on call. So like every 3-4 nights, you have to sleep over at the hospital. And and interestingly, I remember during the full moon, I know there's like a full moon conspiracy, but I'm telling you, man, during the full moon, the ER will be banging. And people, we would fight. The residents and the medical students would fight to not be on call during the full moon. So yeah, that's legit, man, from my experience.
It might be a conspiracy, but I would actually schedule my shifts and make sure to be off around the full moon.
Yeah, you too, right?
It's not even if someone's listening to this and you are as mainstream and conventional as they come, which I support whatever's right for you. I've never met a nurse or a doctor who is like, it is kind of a pattern, or where they deny that. So I don't know why that is. Interesting you bring that up, because in my own health journey, I noticed that my mental health symptoms flared up on the full moon. And I remember it was with Otto, and we walked out of the ER covered in hives, and I looked up, and the provider I was working with helped me notice there was a pattern. So there's something there. For me, I think it was parasites. Who knows what it is?
Yeah.
But if that is possible, do you have any ideas of why that could be? Obviously not fact, but why do you think it could be?
Well, because about 3/4 of our body is made up of water. So if the moon has the gravitational pull enough to affect the tides, and my understanding is that the Navy designs their course or their schedule, their sailing schedule based on the moon, I would think that it's not that far of a stretch for 75% of our body made up of water to be influenced to some extent by the gravitational pull of the moon. Now, there are some people who are saying that there's no such thing as gravity. The moon doesn't exist. Let's put that out of the equation. Assuming that it does, that's what I believe is happening, that it has some pull and that's affecting us mentally.
So that sounds like you would then have a belief that we are part of nature. Nature affects us and vice versa.
Yeah,
do you think
absolutely.
that's okay? Do you think that's a common belief in the hospital system, in that world that we both have spent time?
Man. And I'm glad you brought that up, because you know that only about 5% or less of the Western allopathic system includes nutrition as part of their curriculum. I don't know if you're aware of that, but about 5% or less. Maybe that number might have increased a little bit since my time. But so we even had something called biochemistry of nutrition, and they never taught us anything about how to eat healthy. They made us memorize what certain fat molecules look like. And that was like the exam. So no, we don't get any much of nutritional or healing lessons in medical school. It's all about disease care. We're learning a lot about medicines. We're learning a lot about diseases. We're not learning about health and ways of healing. So
thank you for being honest about that too. And I think a lot of people realize that because they go to their doctors. I'm not anti-doctor. I do see a psychiatrist. And I think there's a time and a place. I think these meds can be overused, and I'll get into that a little bit more, but there wasn't a lot of emphasis on lifestyle. And that's where I come in, because how can you can take all these meds. And I think it was at Tony Robbins, I learned that if you take SSRIs, for example, they might help, but after a period of time, if you have those negative thoughts, it's going to compete with that. And those thoughts create a chemical response, and we don't change our thinking. We don't change anything other than adding a med. So it doesn't mean I'm anti-med. It just means that may not be the only answer or the best answer. And there's a lot more foundationally that people are missing. And it doesn't sound like that's a huge emphasis in the training.
Absolutely. And to piggyback on what you're saying, I mean, we're looking at that from just one angle, from like a neurotransmitter perspective. But I had my heart broken by some girl my third year of medical school. And I was also doing my surgery rotation during that time. And I hated surgery. I wasn't into like seeing open bodies and holding the clamp for 4 hours while the surgeons like operated. Like I hated that existence. It was 2 months of doing that. And then I remember the program director came up to me and she said, you not only look miserable, but you are draining other people's energy around you because you look so depressed. So I was like, yeah, I am depressed. Like I got my heart broken and I'm hating surgery. Like, I don't know what to do. And she said, okay, I need you to see a psychiatrist. So I went to see the University of Behavioral Health psychiatrist there, part of the medical school. And you know what he tells me? He tells me that I need to be on Paxil. I told him exactly what I just told you. I got my heart broken. I'm hating life. He said Paxil. And I said, why Paxil? He said, because the side effect is weight gain. You're a little too skinny right now. You need to gain some weight. So he didn't care about my grief, my heartbreak. He didn't care about the fact that I wasn't feeling like I was in line with my purpose. It was just medicating to numb the symptoms. So this kind of stuff happens all the time in mainstream psychiatry. So that's why it's great to have people like you, me, Kelly Brogan, other people out there who's into the holistic space, just kind of raising awareness that these kind of things happen. Sure, there are benefits of some medications for some people sometimes, but oftentimes the Western system looks at it from one specific angle, and that's not really the solution. Sometimes we need that Band-Aid, especially when the bleed is really severe, but we're not really curing much right now, and that's the issue.
Yes. Those medications can pull people out of a hole. And, if someone's ever in that space and I'm concerned for their well-being, I will tell them, maybe you should go talk to a doctor because it could be really dangerous. However, and I learned about this in nursing school. So what did you learn about suicide rates with SSRIs? If that's going to happen, could that potentially lead to that in some cases?
Yeah. So what we've been trained, and I question a lot of things of what we've been trained, is that when someone is depressed, they're so depressed to the point where even trying to take a knife to slit their throat or hang themselves or whatever they're trying to do, it's just out of the realm of possibility because they're so depressed. So the idea is that if you take an antidepressant and you start feeling a little better, you get a little more pep in your step, that energy boost will give you what it takes to go ahead and complete the job. So having established that, has anyone in my practice who's been feeling suicidal and I started them on an SSRI, went through with it? I've never had that in my 18 plus years of experience, but that's what we've been trained, that the SSRI can enhance that little pep in their step to go and complete the job.
Yeah. So it's important that, especially if someone's on a new med, that they're having regular follow-ups. So many times doctors write a script and then it's like, see you never. And we really don't know. And the person may not know if it's working appropriately or if it's having the opposite effect. For me, I was prescribed SSRIs. And is Paxil an SSRI?
Yeah, that was the one that that psychiatrist prescribed me.
Right. So I wasn't ever on Paxil. I was prescribed Lexapro and some others. I didn't like it. I felt like like a shell of a human, gained a bunch of weight. I was also, when I was 18, told that I needed, I wasn't asked about any of the things that led to it, but I had experienced a lot of sexual trauma, things that I had consented to as much as you can from 11 to 14 that were published and on the internet. And I hated myself. I'm like, fuck, this is who you are now because you've blown it. No nice guy will ever date you. So the thoughts in my head were not very nice. The place where I got belonging wasn't, and acceptance wasn't exactly the best crowd in my opinion. And so by that point, I'm now 18, I just need Depakote for life. So the people that saw me in that 6-month period, they were like, I don't even know who this version of you is. You're so much happier and nicer. It's like there was no one home. I do think there could be a time and a place, but I remember I had to get my liver checked probably monthly.
Yeah.
And what do you think about Depakote and mood stabilizers? And, that is typically used in bipolar disorder. Right. But when else might someone use a mood stabilizer?
Yeah. So Depakote is the medication that we give to help people not feel. It's a seizure medication, and it's like a bazooka that is very toxic to the liver. That's why you have to get your liver enzymes and your Depakote levels checked every couple of months. It's not something that I like to prescribe anyone. In fact, I just recently detoxed someone off of Depakote, and when he came off of it, he cried. You know why? Because he felt emotions for the first time in over a year. So he was just happy about that. But it's one of the ultimate numbers out there. If you have too many anxiety, depression, whatever, and they just don't know what to do, they give you something like Depakote so that you don't feel. And I don't think that's the way to go about doing something like this. I think what you needed at the time was probably someone to talk to, someone to really connect with. Maybe you need a pickleball at the time to just move your body and have some fun. Because sometimes when it comes to these traumatic issues, there's no solution. Maybe sometimes it's just best to just accept that was the older version of you and to move on and focus on other ways to grow. So I've had friends who had severe trauma who've seen therapists for God knows how many years. And what helped them was just accepting what happened and loving themselves again and moving on. And different ways of healing for different folks. But I respectfully disagreed with someone putting you on Depakote when you're going through all the stuff that you're going through at the time.
Yeah, it's very interesting that you said that you learned to, and I don't know the exact words used, but basically learning to say, that's who I was, who would I like to be today, and living in alignment with that person. Who we are is basically our habits, our patterns, and just who we've practiced living as in this world. And so that's something in coaching, I get clients to write out all of their limiting beliefs that tell them why something's not possible, or it's hard, or it's challenging. And if that's the lens that you're looking at things through, it's very likely you'll find evidence of why that's true. I'm a total whore. No good man will ever like me. So I'm not going to try to pursue that, because then I'm going to deal with more rejection. But obviously it's not true. I've been with a man for 6 years that respects me greatly. But first I had to learn to respect myself. So I think that's a big piece of it. And you talk a lot on social media about mental fitness. So when I was 18, going through all of this, I was not really asked about sleep, movement. And in functional medicine coaching, there are 5 pillars. So it's rest and restoration, sleep, exercise and movement, nutrition, which I would also say is nourishment in what we're consuming. And that could be positively or negatively influencing us, not just what we eat, but what we listen to, what we watch on TV, things like that. If you're watching CNN or any mainstream news all day long, I don't know if that's helping your mental health. Stress and relationships. Stress is hard to measure, although Oura Ring, now you can actually see that they just added that feature. And then relationships. So if you don't have anyone that you feel supported by, if you're stressed out all the time, you're not eating. I was also taking Adderall at the time. So no appetite. It was the only thing that got me out of bed.
Right.
The exercise, that's so important. And I'd love to hear why you think each of those 5 areas is helpful. If you don't get enough sleep, how's that going to impact your mental health?
Yeah. So I don't want to take credit for this, because I was hanging out with this friend of mine. And by the way, for the people watching or listening to this, I think a lot of times people underestimate just how much they know and how powerful they are too. Because I had this conversation with a friend of mine, and he's like I don't know, like some bank dude. He's not into health, and he doesn't have a degree in health and wellness. Let's just say that. But I was hanging out with him one day for like a 4th of July barbecue several years back, and this guy just looked amazing. He looked happy. He had a nice vibe, glow around him. He was super fit, and I was like, dude, like what are you doing? Like, how are you looking so good and having this kind of vibe and good energy? And he goes, dude, I feel amazing. And he goes, I discovered the 4 pillars of mental wellness, right? I was like, tell me, because I need some of that. And he said, bro, once I discovered that you got to sleep right, you got to eat right, you got to exercise right, and you got to connect with the right people, done, game over, game changer, he said. Mm-hmm. So that was the catalyst for me to like really looking into that, because the fastest way to get what you want is to find someone who has what you want and learn from them. So I could see some medical doctor who's obese with a BMI of 38 who could barely see his penis, and he could say like, yo man, like you should try to eat healthier, and you might want to take Prozac for your depression, whatever. I'm not going to care about what he says, because if I look at the way he is, I'm not going to want to try to learn from you. But this dude, he had the right vibe, he had the right look, he had the right energy, everything. So in terms of sleep, the largest sleep study involving over like 40,000 surveys and participants showed that the optimal amount of sleep is somewhere between 7 to 8 hours. So about 7.6 hours is the optimal for like your brain function, memory and focus, mood. I think the temperature wise, they recommend to set the room temperature from like 60 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a little bit cold for me. Maybe it's okay for you and your audience, but sleep wise, of course, because if you're not sleeping right, everything else go down the drain. So we all know that. In terms of eating right, I think the one thing that everyone, the carnivores, the nutritarians, the vegans, vegetarians, pescatarians, all could agree upon is to avoid processed foods, eat real foods. And nowadays we also know that the foods now aren't as nutritious as they used to be. Like the soils are depleted of minerals and nutrients. There's a saying that we are not what we eat, but we are what we ate. So if you have plants that are growing in nutrient deprived soil, and then the cows are eating, unhealthy plants, and then we're eating unhealthy cows, then it just is patterned. So I think it's very important now more than ever to supplement, especially with certain basic supplementations. And then the third part is exercise the body. I would say exercise the mind, right? We all know how to exercise the body, but in terms of exercising the mind, I'm saying that the opposite of depression is fun, and not enough people really focus on having fun with the people that they love or the people that they care about. And so one of the ways that my family and I have fun is we like to play chess. We love to play pickleball. And it's a great opportunity for us to put down the phone and be more present and create memories with the ones that we love. So that's stimulating to the mind, and that's fun. We also like to read. So that's also stimulating and exercising the mind. So exercise the mind and body. And last but not least, connect with the right people. So if I hang out with people like you and Otto and some really cool people that like know their shit and they have big goals and they're moving towards a greater purpose, versus my closest friend who still lives with his mommy and daddy in his basement at the age of 48, smoking weed all day, all night with his loser girlfriend. No offense, Ray, but she's a loser. Sorry, I'm just
Ray.
not going to get anywhere in life. You know what I'm saying? So I would hang out with them every once in a blue moon. But aside from that, no, I like to hang out with people that actually have like much greater visions and purpose in their lives.
I'm so glad you said that about fun, because honestly, one of the most fun days, nights of my entire year was at the biohacking conference. And I'll never turn down an opportunity for a thong leotard, ever. And
you look amazing in that. Hey, Otto, I meant that too. You looked amazing. Yeah.
It was fun. I mean, it was ridiculous. That's the point. Maybe people were laughing at me. We all had costumes on, but it is just so easy to get sucked into everything that we have to do and all this serious stuff. And one of the core beliefs I had was that fun took away from my success and my productivity. Couldn't disagree with that more now. When I have fun, I have more energy. I'm excited. I'm in a good mood. When I have better energy, I make better videos. Like it's very interesting. But when you work a 9-to-5 job, your energy doesn't seem to matter as much. At least when I was in the hospital, it's like you show up, you do your job. But when you run your own business and, you're posting stuff online, like you've got to make sure you're nurturing yourself, even if you have a 9-to-5 job. But in that career, especially being an entrepreneur, your energy is one of the most important things. And I think fun is so undervalued.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And speaking of energy, I'm 47 years old now, and I'm come to realize that not only should we invest more of our energy into things that are going to help us for the greater good and experience fun and presence and creating memories with our loved ones. But this might sound very silly to you in the audience, but I've recently discovered that anger is the absolute worst possible thing that you could do for your mind, body, and spirit. The absolute worst, the opposite of fun. Another one being anger. Oh my God. Because, you're in your 30s, right? So when you have a very angry episode, you're probably drained for the day. But when you're 47, you're angry, you're done for the week. I mean, emotionally, mentally, you're shot. Physically, you're drained. Spiritually, it's impure. So it takes about a week for me to recover if I have an anger episode. And I'm a lot more sensitive to that as I'm progressing in life. So for everyone watching this, like, think twice about that. The next time someone pisses you off, take a moment to just, 3 deep breaths, walk away from the situation. Because I'm telling you, if you really think about it, anger will be the most toxic thing that you could possibly do to yourself.
Yeah. My doctor mentioned to me that I should go to a smash room. Have you ever heard of that?
Is it a place where you just let loose and just break shit?
Yes, it's not a sexual thing. A smash room is where you actually go and break things, and you don't have to do any of the cleanup. You go there and it's just a really cathartic experience. So how can people let go of anger? At least for me, it's usually physical, something like that. I've never actually gone journaling, moving. When I'm really pissed off, it's definitely not the time to problem solve. And I'll do some subconscious tracks. There's something called Orpheus. Have you ever heard of that before?
No, I think you brought that up to me before.
Yeah.
But I haven't done it yet. Yeah.
Okay. It's incredible. It's like a 12-minute track, and you can identify all the emotions. So there's a theory, I don't claim that it's mine, but it's that we have an emotional bucket. We have a toxin bucket. Like sometimes the bucket's full and one little thing will go into the bucket and it spills over. And sometimes the punishment doesn't fit the crime, meaning that we have anger. And yeah, I'm pissed off that there are dishes in the sink, but my response is disproportionate to the situation. And what I've learned is it can be old emotions that just haven't come out. And now there's an opportunity to do that. So the way I look at it, we can do things on a subtle daily basis, regular basis, to let that out, to let that go. Breath work is another favorite. Writing, the subconscious tracks from Orpheus, movement, anything like that. Is there anything that you would add to that for just like dealing with the anger? Because I don't think we should stuff it down, but I don't think that should be like our emotional home either.
I couldn't agree with you more. So when you have anger, that is energy of some sort, and that is an opportunity to utilize that in some form of a socially constructive way. So the other day, I was pissed off about something that happened, and I benched more than I ever did in my life. So I was really proud of myself. And then after I did that, that anger, it fueled me to get to a certain point with the weight training. And then afterwards, like, damn, I did that. That was my all-time record at the age of 47. So yeah, there obviously, and then look at a guy like Mike Tyson. I mean, he's someone who had a lot of anger. Now he seems very namaste, to be honest with you. He does. Back in the day, I mean, if he didn't have boxing, he probably would have ended up in prison. I think he ended up being in prison eventually, but you know what I'm saying? At the younger age, he used all that anger and whatever animosity he had towards a socially constructive way in the form of boxing. So yeah, there's definitely positive ways to manage that.
I love what you said just about using that anger and just at the gym, using it for good, like turning it into fuel. And I remember I dropped out of high school, I think first semester of my sophomore year. And I was told I would never get into NYU, which is where I wanted to go to nursing school. And I was like, fuck that. I'm going to go to Duke. And that was like laughable to these people at the time. But I was just like, I'm going to study every day. And there was nobody that could tell me I couldn't do it. So in that sense, I don't know if that's the healthiest reason, but still I use that as motivation rather than crawling back into a hole and giving up.
Wait, you went to Duke?
Yeah, for nursing school. I went to College of Charleston and then Duke.
That. You went to Duke? I got rejected by Duke. I wanted to go to Duke so bad for college.
I got in the first time. And
congratulations.
Thanks.
That's amazing.
It was a big deal because once again, I had this identity that I'm a high school dropout, I'm a floozy. But I will say to that, I thought all of my problems were going to be solved, maybe similarly to how you said you wanted to be a doctor. And I did think people would respect me after having this terrible reputation. I did think I'd be helping people, not to the extent that I would have liked to. And I also thought it would help me learn how to be healthy. It actually destroyed my health until I couldn't work for a whole year in 2018. Yeah. So, we all learn these lessons, but nursing school was so tough. Sending prayers to anyone. I mean, I'm sure med school is not any easier. I think it's crazy that you guys have to do 36-hour shifts for some residencies. How can you do that?
But I imagine you had it pretty rough at Duke also, but man, mad respect, because that was my number one choice. And then I got rejected by it. So good for you. But yeah, you're absolutely right, because things like that, like when I got bullied and rejected by friends and girls and whatever, that rejection fueled me to work a lot harder than if I was just like happy and at peace.
Yeah. Well, let me just tell you, as much as I really enjoyed the education, there were not a lot of high maintenance hippies there. I felt like I did not fit in there at all, which was very different from my experience at College of Charleston. So you know what? There's a lid for every pot. If you don't like where you are, I just was like, this isn't meant for me. I love being a nurse today. I have this job where I was yesterday. That just wasn't my ideal environment, but the school was great. I'm still paying that one off. Okay. So did you learn, we talked about nutrition briefly and that you didn't learn a whole lot. That wasn't a big foundational piece, maybe like macros and things like that, but it's kind of limited. Did you learn about the subconscious mind and or subconscious work when you were in school?
Not in medical school. We definitely did not learn anything about things like that in medical school. So we're talking about the subconsciousness anywhere under the level of conscious awareness, which affects pretty much like 95% of our thoughts, our behavior, our feelings. A lot of times people are doing things via like gut feelings. We have certain routines. We do things without really like being aware of why we're doing it. We're attracted to certain people that maybe remind us of certain people from our past. No, we didn't learn any of that stuff. And residency, maybe they touched upon it, but not to the extent that a lot of people are aware of it now, especially with this like psychedelic revolution, which these psychedelic medicines that are out there, we'll talk about that in a moment, allows us an opportunity to peek into the subconsciousness to see what's really holding us back and maybe give us an opportunity to do some shadow work and untangle some of the things that's been keeping us behind. So, but to answer your question, no, we didn't really get into much of that. The medical school was very good at teaching us how to pass the medical school exams. That's basically what it was all about.
Yeah, I remember that being a priority too. And, I did learn a lot, but I think a lot of people think you go to nursing school, you go to med school, and that's it. I don't know, maybe a couple continuing education modules here and there, but in your practice, I think that's where I learned the most, was from taking care of patients and seeing what the trends and the patterns were, who's hospitalized, who's not hospitalized, in 2020, 2021, especially. It's just very interesting to observe. The food was not very good. And I get it. Like sometimes you just need calories, I suppose. But I'm like, for patients dealing with cancer, for someone who's so sick that they need to be hospitalized, we shouldn't give them inflammatory processed foods. Sorry.
There's this book here. This is the Psychiatric Pharmacy Psychopharmacology Bible. Okay. It's called the Stephen Stahl's manual. And this is what we learned throughout medical school and during residency. And this book, written by Dr. Stephen Stahl, talks about how if you're on a medication like Zoloft, these SSRIs, Paxil, Prozac, whatever, if someone wants to come off of it, or if you want to taper off, you cut it down by 50% for about 3-4 days, and then another 50% for 3-4 days, and then you discontinue it. If you follow that, people will go crazy detoxing off of some of these medications. So when I followed that manual for one of my clients back in the day, he said, "Are you crazy?" Because I tried doing it that way, and like I'm having brain zaps, I'm getting suicidal. I'm saying, no, that's not true, because Dr. Stephen Stahl said, according to the Psychiatric Bible here, that that's the way to taper off someone. And he said no. And we got into this argument. And I had this moment where I was like, am I going to listen to the doctor who wrote this versus the patient who's experiencing it? And then I chose to listen to the patient, because I was like, all right, that made sense. Because I saw it in his eyes. Like, he seemed really desperate. Like, dude, you have no idea what you're talking about. And I didn't like that statement, but I'm like, truthfully, I don't, because I've never been on this medication. So that was the primer, the catalyst for me to really start listening to what people had to say. And then people will and once you establish that rapport and that trust is there, they'll give you some really good feedback, some awesome information as far as like what other meds that they tried that help alleviate certain symptoms when they're trying to come off of certain chemicals. So I felt like my PhD in psychiatry, like medications, came from vibing with my clients who, a lot of people who abuse substances, they know their drugs very, very well. And we've had some deep scientific talks, and that's kind of like how I'm able to help people come off of these psychiatric medications, because they don't teach you properly how to come off of psych meds. It's something that I had to figure out from experimenting with my clients.
Yeah. I think I remember on a live you spoke about, I don't know if it was Prozac, it was one medication where you can cut the dose, but then at some point you can't anymore. And that's where it's a huge jump. What medication was that?
There's a lot of medications like that, but Effexor is the big one. So Effexor, Paxil, and Effexor, Paxil, and Zoloft are, in my opinion, from my clinical experience, the 3 hardest drugs to come off of. At least with Paxil and Zoloft, they're pills, so you could like cut it into smaller pieces. But Effexor is extended release, and so like they don't make it easy for you to cut it down. And the lowest dose of Effexor is 37.5 milligrams. So at least with Zoloft, the lowest dose is 25. So you could cut that to 12.5 and then 7.5. After that, you could like keep chipping it down. Effexor, like, how do you cut up an extended release formulation? Because it's layered to be extended release. You're not supposed to cut it like that. So they don't make it easy. Yeah.
And it's very interesting. So when people go on these medications, like an SSRI, do you ever have a plan with them? Hey, if you're going to try this 6 to 12 months, we'll reassess how you're feeling and come up with a plan to get you off of it. Do people want to stay on the medications for years and years and years? What do you find?
Yeah. I don't know a single person that comes into the office saying, I want to be on a medication for life. So no one really says that, but they all have this notion that they're going to be on it for a certain amount of time and come off it. Now, having said that, there are some people who take an SSRI or some of these mood stabilizers, anxiety medications, and they like the way they feel on it. And then sometimes I would shave it down. And then they said, look, I'm on 5 milligrams of this. This is really improving the quality of my life. Could we just keep this? And it's low enough where, look, at some point, if you get pregnant or if you don't want to be on this anymore, it's easy for me to shave it off. So think about it this way. Like if they're on 100 milligrams of medication, it's like a big jump down to stop it from there. But if we bring it down to 2.55 milligrams, and if that little bit helps them, it's easier to jump off of that. Mm-hmm. So I try to be responsible in that way, where if I put you on something, I'm confident that I could take you off of it. Having said that, some people don't want to come off of it at a certain point, but a lot of people, after their life circumstances a lot better and they adapt to having a healthier lifestyle, it's a lot easier for them to come off of these kind of things and not have to rely on them.
Yeah. Do you get a lot of heat from the freedom community about your role as a psychiatrist? Because I'm about freedom, which means you weigh your pros and your cons. There might be side effects, but you get to make your choice. That's what freedom means to me. So have you gotten any heat from people who happen to be wanting freedom, but also really against pharmaceuticals? What has that been like?
Oh, yeah. We get that. I get that all the time. I mean, the big thing is that when people say you heal you, I'm saying I agree with you on that 95% of the time. But there are certain conditions where, if you have an acute manic episode, or if you have acute psychosis or schizophrenia, sunflower seeds, blueberries, tatting your butthole against the sun, drinking plasma, like that's not going to do it. Maybe in the future, they may have technology to help eradicate bipolar manic episodes or psychoses. But as of now, the only thing that really helps out, tone down these psychotic symptoms, especially like if someone is paranoid that their sister is trying to kill them, so they're having thoughts about want to kill their sister before their sister kills them, a medication could be very helpful. In fact, that's a true story. One of my clients, he was on an antipsychotic medication for about 2 years, and then he worked on his lifestyle changes, and now he's not even on any antipsychotics, and him and his sister are BFFs. So a medication in that situation may have saved 2 lives, So I would agree with the holistic wellness population, the Namaste crew, that of course you heal you 95% of the time, but there are certain cases, I'm asking people to be open-minded, that there's certain cases where some medications could be helpful for some people sometimes.
Mm-hmm. The way that I look at it is the state that we're in. I'll give you an example. I worked with a medical intuitive, and she suggested that I see a psychiatrist in 2019 for gabapentin. And I said, no, I don't want to take any medication. Maybe you didn't really know what I was like, very irritable, very tense. But it made it hard for us to do a lot of the deeper work because of my state. So as much as I was like not all for it, it did really help me relax so that I could go there in a way to start to do some deeper things. EMDR is an example. I'm pretty sure that is not woo-woo, and insurance will cover that. That is a evidence-based treatment. What are your thoughts on EMDR?
So EMDR works pretty solidly for people experiencing PTSD, from my experiences. So we have a therapist that does that, and we get some decent results. But and also someone during my ketamine training asked me to. So during my ketamine training, they inject me with ketamine and they do therapy for me, right? So this one lady trained in EMDR, and she asked me to remember a traumatic moment in my life. And I was like, oh man, like I don't really feel like I have trauma, but if I had to talk about a very anxiety provoking incident in my life, it was when I was in medical school where I was giving a sleep presentation and I fainted from a panic attack. Wow. And I said, that was probably as closest thing to a traumatic memory in my life. Like it was embarrassing. And, ever since then, like I never wanted to public speak again. So she asked me to remember that incident while she was doing her thing with the eyes. And what's interesting was that after that session, that incident, thinking about it, I was pretty numb to it. Like I still saw it, right, but it didn't like give me that like feeling of anxiety. And that was about a week before I spoke at the biohacking conference.
Amazing. So, you crushed it.
And me going there, speaking at that conference was one of my ways of like, okay, like I got to face this thing, this public speaking thing. So I do my Instagram lives all the time, but speaking in front of a live audience is a completely different situation. So I felt like it definitely helped me in that. Mm-hmm. And I love that there is something out there for the treatment of PTSD, because quite frankly, most of what we have for PTSD treatment sucks. And about 5 to 6% of the American population, which is about 13 million people, have PTSD. I think it's only going to get worse after all this stuff that's happening in the Middle East. Very traumatic for a lot of people, families involved. I have a friend whose cousin just got murdered there. I have another friend, this Indian guy who just got jumped in New York City the other day because they thought that he was Muslim. So there's just a lot of traumatic things that are happening for people. So I think that number is going to increase. But you, of course, know that next year in 2024, they're probably going to approve MDMA for the treatment of PTSD, which I'm very curious to know how that plays out.
Very interesting. So I was re-diagnosed with CPTSD. Do you think it's bullshit? What do you think? Is it in my DSM-5? I don't know.
Complex PTSD?
Yes. I don't even know if that's in here, but that's what I was told. I will be honest, it made me feel a lot less broken, and that the way that I was showing up in life was a response to the things I had experienced and what I believed about myself.
Yeah.
And not that you are, X condition, you're going to need X medication for life, and that's just who you are. And I believed that for a really long time, which made me believe I was broken and crazy, and I made actions that align with that. The second that I heard that it was because of the things that I had experienced that shaped my personality, and not to brag, but that I must have a very big amygdala, and that things like meditation twice a day for 8 weeks has been shown to shrink that. And you can actually visually measure that. So it felt like there was something I could do, and that changed everything for me. But what do you think about it? Complex PTSD.
Yeah. Look, I have mad respect for the diagnosis of PTSD or complex PTSD. And, we have a lot of people in the health, freedom, and wellness movement who, the thing that I have an issue with is if someone has a shitty day nowadays, they think that they're traumatized. Right. And, someone gets fired from their job. Oh, it was traumatic that I argued with my boss. He said certain things about me. My mom yelled at me. That was traumatic. No, you had a shitty day. Let's not disrespect trauma. Because when someone like you or some of the people in the Middle East right now are going through legitimate trauma, it actually impacts your brain structure. So there are studies to prove that your hippocampus, the part of the brain that recognizes spatial memory, like certain people, like taxi drivers, like have like extra big hippocampuses because they know how to get around. Maybe not so much nowadays with the GPS system, but back in the day, people have to remember how to get from point A to point B. So we know that the hippocampus shrinks for people who have severe PTSD. We also know that the amygdala becomes hypersensitive, the part of the brain that's responsible for storing a lot of fear-based memories. So that gets hypersensitive. People get more hypervigilant and alert really fast. We have brain connectivity issues. So different departments of the brain, the frontal part, the visual part, the auditory, the imagination department, they all connect in some way. But when someone has legitimate PTSD, those connections get severed. So it's really hard for people to like process information. We also have issues with neuroplasticity as well, where your brain rewires itself. So if you see a cute guy, maybe you might say, oh, he's attractive. But if someone was like raped or sexually assaulted, now your brain rewires itself so that you see a guy and you're afraid. So that's what I'm talking about. Legitimate PTSD, where your brain structure changes and severely impacts your quality of life. Some people get yelled at by their wives and they say they're traumatized. I say that's not the case. So I hope that we could separate the two.
Yeah. There are clients that I've worked with that have dealt with things that are beyond traumatic, like being kidnapped, and they didn't even realize it. And they really didn't even remember that being a part of their story, which I also think is very interesting, how you could block something like that out. It's like, oh yeah, I guess that did happen.
Yeah.
It's very fascinating. In medical school, did you learn about the gut microbiome at all?
Hell no.
Didn't think so.
Hell no.
Is this a newer discovery?
This, for me, this is something that I discovered after medical school. A friend of mine bought me a book by Dr. Joel Fuhrman. He's a nutritarian. He's a family doctor. He wrote 8 New York Times bestsellers, and he talks about how eating healthy is good for your mind, body, and mind, body health. Like rocket science, right? Like revolutionary information. I didn't learn any of that in medical school. And that was the first time that I learned about gut bacteria and the gut biome. And you want not only healthy, good bacteria, but you want good, healthy diversity of the healthy bacteria as well. So that's something that I learned after medical school, but absolutely not. We don't talk about any of that stuff. Probiotics, none of that mentioned in medical school. Zero. At Robert Wood Johnson Medical School, I'm calling that out. Robert Wood Johnson, New Jersey Medical School did not have a single lecture on gut biome health.
And I've also learned that they're discovering there's a microbiome. And I think there's this whole organism inside of us. We are an organism. There's this whole environment inside of us. And, parasites even, I think they can cause a lot of problems. Actually, my mental health improved significantly after my first parasite cleanse, but I don't think the goal is to eliminate all of them. Just like the goal isn't to eliminate all staph or C. diff or anything like that. It's really about getting the gut in harmony. But when the gut's out of balance, when there are infections, maybe nutrient deficiencies, we're eating food that has been grown in depleted soil or highly processed foods. Are we getting the minerals we need? Are we able to get the neurotransmitters that we need? And because they are made where? In the gut or the brain, the neurotransmitters?
Both.
Okay.
Both.
Where's the majority
it said that
made?
about 80% of serotonin, 80 to 90% is made in the guts, but a lot of that doesn't really go to the brain either. So it's made both in the gut and brain. Yeah.
Okay. But it still shows that the gut is very important. And another thing that I learned was that I was eating perfectly clean, organic meals, but I was walking around. I was, in the break room at the hospital, beep, beep, all this noise. Like, how could my body prioritize resting and digesting when it's thinking, quite literally, there are sirens and alarms going off, and it's just hard. So the brain's going to choose, the body will choose fight or flight over rest and digest. And I just don't think a lot of us realize how important our state is when we're eating or just when we're living our life in general.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What percentage of your training, and I would imagine it's high because you're in school to be a psychiatrist, but what percentage of the training was on pharmaceuticals versus other modalities?
Ooh, I would say 99% was on drugs and diseases.
Okay.
Yeah, a good 99%. And the 1% would be like they had a course on statistics. They had a course on ethics. They had a course on biochemistry of nutrition, which I didn't learn anything. But yeah, I would say 99%. Everything else was on disease and drugs. Yeah. Okay. So when you see these people on Instagram talking about the Rockefeller medical system and how corrupt it is, like, I can't refute that. They're right. And, when I graduated from medical school, I just came out of that like, what was that? Because you know how in 2020 and 2021, like everyone was like, how could you not be awake? How could you not see the truth? Like, you see people saying that all the time. I was the only one in medical school that was saying the exact same thing. Like, how can you guys not see that this system's broken? Like, this is all about disease. It's not about health. They're not talking about anything healthy. They're not talking about any solutions. It's all about Band-Aids. And then nobody wanted to hear that because they're too busy studying for the board exams. I was the only one that was super frustrated. The other two guys, Raj and Patrick, they both quit. And so I was the only one remaining who questioned that. And I just wanted to get that degree so bad so I could do my own holistic thing that I'm doing right here. So I put up with it. And, that degree right there that I have, this one right here, that represents how much pain I had to go through to get what I want. That's the only thing. When I look at that, I see pain and no pain, no gain. That's what I see from that diploma there. I didn't learn anything in medical school aside from like drugs and diseases. But that's not what I use to help people. You want results. If you have a family member or you're coming in to see me, you want to feel better. You want results. You don't need me to point out the fact that you got this wrong with you, and here's what we could do to Band-Aid you up. Like, that's not what you want. You want healing.
Yeah. And I think you can do both. I think you can do both and explain to people sometimes this is to pull you out of a hole, or let's say you're crying all day or you can't function or show up to things because you're so overloaded. I'm not against the medication, but I really think that's not going to be enough to really address and get your best quality of life.
Yeah.
I just think that's what it's really about as far as it being holistic. So holistic meaning, we can do things that will help us on a physical level or a physiological level. But once again, sometimes it's not enough. And those medications, as powerful as they are, I don't think we can out supplement a poor quality lifestyle, but I also don't think we can out medicate it. Maybe for a little bit. And I'll give you an example with Adderall. I mean, I love that. I told my psychiatrist, it's been over 6 years. I said, I will never take it again. I don't think I had a healthy relationship with it. I stopped eating. So this was kind of what the timeline looked like. I was friendly. I was able to get a lot done. I just felt nicer, more productive, but I didn't eat. I got really thin. If I'm not eating, I'm not giving myself the building blocks that I need. So I started to feel depressed. I take something for that. And then I need something to help me turn off at night and something to help me get up in the morning. And that was my life for at least 10 years. At least.
Yeah.
And it was just so normal. So it's wild. So what would you say some of the biggest themes seen in your practice would be, and different types of diagnoses? Is it a lot of, and I don't like to say like, I am ADD. I'm a person who has symptoms of ADD, and what can I do to mitigate them? I don't like to identify with the condition, but what types of symptoms presented do you typically see?
Yeah, the most common one is, I would say, anxiety. And then there are a lot of addiction issues and a lot of people who have like relationship conflicts. So those are probably the most common things that I'm seeing. And I would say ADHD is always mixed in there, but the vast majority of people who believe that they have ADHD don't have ADHD. They're just addicted to the phone. And then once they're stimulated by the addictive, ultra addictive content that's only getting more and more and more addicting, you pull yourself away from the screen, you're looking around, everything else is mundane and boring now.
Yep.
So then they believe that they have ADHD when they don't. They're just addicted to technology. So that would be the vast majority of people that carry this diagnosis. I'm not saying that ADHD is not legit, but I'm just saying the national average for screen time was around 7.5 hours just a few years ago. More recently, according to the American Pediatrics Association, it recently broke 9 hours. For
kids too?
Yeah, for teenage and adults. 9 hours of screen time a day. That's the new average now, according to the American Pediatrics or Adolescent Psychiatry Association or so on. So 9 hours. So when everyone is, Ashley, you, me, and everyone watching this right now, we must acknowledge the fact that TikTok, Instagram, YouTube Shorts, like all these content are getting, they're really good. They could summarize the whole Israel-Palestinian conflict in 59 seconds. Like, and they do a great job and like showing the visuals and the music and everything along with it. So because the content, and YouTube too, YouTube could show you something amazing in 20 minutes instead of watching a 2-hour movie. So content are getting shorter. The quality and the production are getting better. It's just getting more and more addicting. You have these people who have PhDs and psychological PhDs who are like masters at making things more addictive to get you glued to the screen. You can't compete with that. So when you see these types of contents and learning in that way versus a kid has to go to school and you get some boring teacher drawing on the chalkboard or whatever, that kid doesn't have ADHD. He's just used to another level of stimulation and just hard to focus there. So that's something that like kills me whenever people say that in conjunction with the fact that they're smoking like 2-3 blunts a day. And I'm saying, okay, well, you know, that's affecting your focus. No, the marijuana helps me focus better. Maybe for the first 30 minutes or so, but afterwards you're just like in a daze the rest of the time.
Thank you for listening to the High Maintenance Hippie podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the podcast, rate it, and leave a review, ideally a 5-star review if you loved it. All of this is free of charge and really helps me to be able to run the podcast. If you take a screenshot and tag me, I'll repost you and shout you out on Instagram. So tag Ashley Taylor Wellness and High Maintenance Hippie podcast. If you have any feedback or guests that you'd like to have, I would love to hear from you so that I'm not just talking at you. I really want to deliver things that are valuable. So send me an email with any feedback, suggestions, or ideas for guests at ashley@ashleytaylorwellness.com. And I will leave you with a disclaimer. Please know that this is not medical advice or replacement for seeking medical care. Everything discussed on this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. Always consult with your medical provider before making any changes. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.